Now, those of you who are staying here might have homework for this week, but it can't be something that's going to be required. Does that make sense? Okay, so we are on page 38, and we're just going to skip the emboldened, but we'll start with the equip. No napping. I can't nap. Since the 1950s, how have advancements in technology changed our understanding of the universe and life on Earth? So what happened in the 1950s that caused us to have a far greater understanding of the universe and life on Earth? Yes. Yeah, the discovery of DNA led to the anthropic principle of biology. Because it enabled us to see the intricate details of life through the advancement of microscopes. Better microscopes enabled us to see deeper and deeper into the cells of living things, even just single-celled amoebas. We were able to see. Before that time, we could just say, oh, there's nothing to it. It's just a single-cell amoeba. It's a simple life form. But those microscopes led to a much greater understanding of how complex it is. And that leads into question 2, which is, how complex is a one-celled amoeba? What does the book call it? Okay, there's 1,000 encyclopedias or sets of encyclopedias. It's a little bit nebulous as to which one it is, but it also says that it's astonishingly complex. That a single-celled amoeba is astonishingly. What is the supreme problem for Darwinists to explain? Davis? The first life, explaining the origin of the first life. It isn't, the biggest problem isn't how did everything come from one single celled amoeba. That's a problem. But the bigger problem is, how did life come from non-life? And no scientist has been able to do that, been able to take chemicals and make life. Now, they can take life and make life, but not from non-living. What 2 scientists discovered the DNA, and how significant was the discovery? Let's start with who discovered it. 2 scientists. James Watson and Francis Crick. And how significant was it, Lucas? Or why? I would prefer, why was it significant? Yeah, an atheist would say, well, that's your opinion. But I agree with it. It's significant because it unlocks not only the complexity of life, it not only shows us how incredibly complex even the simplest life is, but it also has a specific message. It also shows the specific message of each life form, of each cell. Every cell in your body has a specific message. Which, Lucas, I completely agree, would point to a creator, not an accident, right? So if we can't directly observe the past, then what scientific principles can we use to help discover what caused the first life? Davis? Forensic principles. Did you talk to your dad about this last night? Well, he could tell you a lot He's a lawyer. He's a prosecuting lawyer. So forensic principles are what detectives would call evidence. It's just scientists are doing it, not detectives. And the kind of the cornerstone of the forensic principles is the principle of uniformity. That the way things happen now are the same as the way things happened in the past. Causes in the past are the same as causes today. And they gave you those examples of the Grand Canyon and Mount Rushmore. And then, so that's the next question. State the principle of uniformity. Causes in the past are the same as causes we observe today. So when applying the principle of uniformity to Mount Rushmore, or even the simplest life form, what conclusions can be drawn? What's one conclusion that can be drawn? Rose? What's one conclusion that can be drawn? Number 7. Yeah. If an intelligent designer was necessary for Mount Rushmore, because no natural cause can ever do that, then would that not be the same for something else that you never see anything caused naturally? Yeah, so the same thing should be said of the simplest life. And I love what they say about scientists trying to create life to prove evolution. It wouldn't prove evolution. It would prove that life has to be created. It can't happen on its own. It can't happen accidentally. If Dawkins and Crick admittedly recognize the design of life, why don't they admit an intelligent designer? They admit that it appears to have been designed, but there's no designer. There's nobody that designed it. Why? Why do they believe that? Davis? Yeah. They rule it out. They have a priori, a prior commitment to naturalism. So it doesn't matter what the science actually says. It can't be God. That's not good science, is it? That's the next thing we're going to read. That's bad science to say, okay, it can be anything but this. We're going to rule this out in advance. You're no longer doing science if you do that. Science is a search for causes. Whatever that cause may be, you may not like it. It may not be what you expected. But it's a search for causes. And that cause, all causes have to be on the table, following the evidence where it leads. Imagine being a detective working on a case, and it turns out that all of the evidence points to someone you know and love. You may not like that conclusion, but it doesn't change the fact of the evidence, where the evidence is pointing. So here's what I wrote down. Dawkins and Crick have preordained that design is not an option. Their preconceived idea of naturalism prevents even considering intelligent design. So as I've told you before, it's like saying, tell me what 2 plus 2 is, but it can't be 4. If we rule out 4, we never get to the right answer. Okay, so that's through 8. And now I'd like you to open up your big atheist books to page 119. Good science versus bad science. It is commonly believed that the so-called creation-evolution debate, now often called the intelligent design versus naturalism debate, entails a war between religion and science. the Bible and science, or faith and reason. This perception is perpetuated by the media, who consistently depict the debate in terms of the 1960 movie Inherit the Wind, which fictionalized the 1925 Scopes monkey trial. You know that depiction. It basically goes like this. Here come those crazy religious fundamentalists again, and they want to impose their dogmatic religion and ignore objective science. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. The creation-evolution debate is not about religion versus science, or the Bible versus science. It's about good science versus bad science. Likewise, it's not about faith versus reason. It's about reasonable faith versus unreasonable faith. It may surprise you to see just who is practicing the bad science and who has the unreasonable belief. Make sure you're following along with me as I read, please. Follow along with me. The reason I do this is because your comprehension of it and your attention of it, if you see it and hear it. You can do this for yourself by reading aloud to yourself. As we've mentioned before, science is a search for causes. Logically, there are only two types of causes, intelligent and non-intelligent, in other words, natural. The Grand Canyon had a natural cause, and Mount Rushmore had an intelligent one. Unfortunately, on the question of first life, Darwinists like Dawkins and Crick rule out intelligent causes before they even look at the evidence. In other words, their conclusions are preloaded into their assumptions. Spontaneous generation by natural laws must be the cause of life because they consider no other options. Spontaneous generation is what critics of evolution call a just so story. Evolutionists provide no evidence to support spontaneous generation. It isn't supported by empirical observation or forensic science principles. It's just so because life exists. And since intelligent causes are ruled out in advance, there can be no other possible explanation. The problem for the Darwinists is immense. Biochemist Klaus Dose admits that more than 30 years of research into the origin of life has led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth, rather than to its solution. At present, all discussions or principal theories and experiments in the field either end in a stalemate or in a confession of ignorance. Francis Crick laments, "Every time I write a paper on the origin of life, I swear I will never write another one, because there is too much speculation running after too few facts." And that's saying that that's the scientists that are speculating after few facts, not the creationists, not those that do. The evidence is so strong for intelligence and against naturalism that prominent evolutionists have actually suggested aliens deposited the first life here. Fred Hoyle, the same evolutionist who popularized the steady state theory we discussed in chapter 3, invented this far-out theory called panspermia for seeds everywhere, after calculating that the probability of life arising by spontaneous generation was effectively zero. Panspermia doesn't solve the problem. It simply puts another step. Who made the intelligent aliens? As crazy as the theory sounds, at least panspermia advocates recognize that some kind of intelligence must be behind the amazing wonder we call life. Still, when top evolutionists have to resort to aliens to explain the origin of life, you know the simplest life must be incredibly complex. Another panspermia advocate, Chandra Wick something, you can try and figure it out, admits that the Darwinists are acting on blind faith when it comes to spontaneous generation. He observes the emergence of life from primordial soup on the earth is merely an article of faith that scientists are finding difficult to shed. There is no experimental, this guy is not a Christian, he's an atheist. There is no experimental evidence to support this at the present time. Indeed, all attempts to create life from non-life, starting from Pasteur, have been unsuccessful. Microbiologist Michael Denton, though himself an atheist, adds, "The complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it is impossible to accept that such an object could have been thrown together suddenly by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from a miracle. In light of just so explanations, such as spontaneous generation and panspermia, who do you think is practicing the bad science? The people derisively making fun of religious, the theists and creationists, or the enlightened ones, the atheists and Darwinists, who are really just as religious as the religious? Physicist and information scientist Hubert Hockney realizes it's the Darwinists. He writes, the belief that life on Earth arose spontaneously from non-living matter is simply a matter of faith in strict reductionism and based entirely on ideology. So reductionism is a simplistic answer. You reduce something to its simplest part and say that's what it is. And then ideology is a belief, is a way of believing. So faith in the the least complicated answer and taken on faith. Yockey is right. Darwinists falsely believe they can reduce life to its non-living chemical components. That's the ideology of reductionism. For Darwinists, like Dawkins or Crick, who must believe that only the material and not the immaterial exists, then life can be nothing more than chemicals. But life is clearly more than chemicals. Life contains a message, DNA, that is expressed in chemicals. But those chemicals cannot cause the message any more than the chemicals in ink, and paper can cause the sentences on this page. A message points to something beyond chemicals. The message in life, just like the one on this page, points to an intelligence beyond its chemical elements. We realize that life is certainly more than chemicals with a message, but the key point here is that it's certainly not less. So the blind allegiance to this naturalistic reductionist ideology, which is against all observation and reason, Darwinists dogmatically assert that life arose spontaneously from its non-living chemical components. Ironically, this is exactly what Darwinists have long accused creationists of doing, allowing their ideology to overrule observation and reason. In truth, it's the Darwinists who are allowing their faith to overrule observation and reason. Creationists and intelligent design proponents are simply making a rational inference from the evidence. They are following the evidence exactly where it leads, back to an intelligent cause. Yockey is not the only one pointing out that Darwinists have the physiological bias against intelligent causes. Philip Johnson serves as a sharp edge of the steel wedge that is now splitting the petrified wood of naturalism in the scientific community. He correctly points out that Darwinism is based on an a priori, a prior commitment to materialism, not on a philosophically neutral assessment of the evidence. Separate the philosophy from the science, and the proud tower collapses. And it's not just the critics of evolution who see this bias. Prominent Darwinists admit it as well. In fact, Dawkins himself has acknowledged the bias in responding to an email question from Philip Johnson. Our philosophical commitment to materialism and reductionism is true, but I would prefer to characterize it as a philosophical commitment to a real explanation as opposed to a complete lack of an explanation, which is what you espouse. Dawkins may think he has a real explanation, but as we have seen, his explanation is against all of the observational and forensic evidence. If Richard Dawkins leaks out a half-hearted admission of bias, Darwinist Richard Lewontin of Harvard gushes a complete written confession. Read how Lewontin acknowledges that Darwinists accept absurd just-so stories that are against common sense because of their prior commitment to materialism. Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, In spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just stories, because we have a prior commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institution of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to the material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and set up concepts that produce material explanations. No matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated, moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Here's what he's saying. Yeah, all the evidence points to a creator, but we can't have that because we don't believe in a creator. We don't believe there is one. So even though all the evidence points elsewhere, we're going to stick with atheism, even though it doesn't make sense. Good science versus bad. Now the real truth comes out. It's not that the evidence supports Darwinism. In fact, according to Lewontin and our own common sense, Darwinist explanations are counterintuitive. They don't make sense. The real truth is that the Darwinists have defined science in such a way that the only possible answer is Darwinism. Any other definition would, God forbid, allow God to get his foot in the door. In the next chapter, we'll investigate the possible motivations for keeping God out. For now, the bottom line is this. The event required to get the atheistic theory of macroevolution out off the ground, the spontaneous generation of the first life, is believed because of false philosophical assumptions disguised as science, not because there are legitimate scientific observations that support spontaneous generation. False science is bad science, and it's the Darwinists who are practicing it. Their belief in spontaneous generation results from their blind faith in naturalism. It takes tremendous faith to believe that the first one-celled creature came together by natural laws, because that's like believing 1,000 encyclopedias resulted from an explosion in a printing shop. Atheists can't even explain the origin of the printing shop, much less the 1,000 encyclopedias. Therefore, we don't have enough faith. So here's what you're going to do with the rest of your time. I would like for you to get as much done as you can, but this is not homework if you don't get it done. And that is to complete Equip questions 9 through 13. Equip questions 9 through 13. I'll write that on the board. And then I'm also going to hand out to you the study guide for Chapter 5. That quiz will be sometime late next week. So I want you to have them now.
Interesting.